Welcome tonight. If you're here for the very first time, we have some people that are, quite a few people that are out, but if you're here from the very first time, would you raise your hand for us? Just raise your hand, real high. There we go. First time visitors, raise your hand real high. We want to get your charge card. No, just raise your hand real high. We have a gift for you. I think Cheryl, if you would see Cheryl in the back later on, we have a gift for you, a little package just to welcome you here tonight. If you are new and you're first time visitor, let me tell you how we do this. I'm going to do a little bit, this is what we normally do. I'll give you in the news, which is related to prophecy for a first part, and then we are going to talk about our Psalm study. We're at Psalm 5 tonight. So let me give you a little bit of in the news of what's happening this week. These are things I take right off the news and tell you a little bit about it. We put them in categories. We know there's a new world order coming, so we know there's a lot of things happening as far as cryptocurrencies. We know there's a lot of things happening with fingerprint recognition, iris recognition. So I'm trying to give you some of the ones that are on the news this week and try to show you how they fit into prophecy. This is Fazoli's restaurant chain. How many of you know who Fazoli's is? Okay, Fazoli's is a chain. It's usually based in the north. Here's what they did this week. They adopt cross-match fingerprint biometrics at their POS, at their places of service. A major U.S. restaurant chain has embraced biometrics for employee management. Crossmatch has announced that Fazoli's restaurant is now using its URU fingerprint readers at 200 locations across 26 states. The fingerprint recognition technology has been implemented at the point of sale, replacing its previous PIN-based authentication system. So what we're seeing, I'll just sum up what I've read. What we're seeing is we're seeing a new wave coming in of trying to pay for things. They're telling us, Fazoli's, that they're having all of their employees fingerprinted so that they can access everything that's in those stores. Also, they have regular people who come there that they're fingerprinting so that they don't have to pay by anything other than their fingerprint, which obviously has all their information. So when we talk about a cashless society, we're watching it not just encroach upon us, but we're watching it come very, very quickly. We're watching cryptocurrencies happen. We're watching cash, people not accepting cash a whole lot anymore. And now we're seeing iris scans, which we've been seeing, fingerprint scans at restaurants. When you see them at restaurants, that's pretty scary. I was telling a class, I think it was a couple weeks ago, another class, that there's a coffee shop in Homewood that has a sign right when you come in that says, "We do not accept cash." And so we're watching it happen. And again, if you're looking at Revelation and you're seeing how it boils down, we know that there's going to be a one world system. We know that the Antichrist is going to get to a spot where you can't buy or sell unless you have this certain mark. So we're seeing some of those things happening right now as far as the money goes. Let me give you this one. Takeaway from Bruce Schneider's new book. Now, you may not know who he is, but he's written several books about the internet. And he says, "Fix the internet before it fixes us." Technologist Bruce Schneider is out with his latest book and its most alarming title yet. Click here to kill everybody. That's what the book says. We've already living in a world where computer attacks can crash cars and disable power plants, both actions that can easily result in catastrophic deaths if done at scale, it says. So okay, it's scary, but Schneider digs into the dangers posted by rapid spread of internet connectivity into all of our things. And of course, there is a rapid spread. If you have a smartphone, if you have a smart TV, we know, we've read you report after report, that they can listen in on anything. They can turn on the speakers and they can listen into anything you're saying in your home. So that's not a conspiracy thing, that's the truth. We just don't know about it. It says this, he goes on to say, just a few of his policy recommendations and predictions when it comes to fixing what he calls the sloppy state of internet security. Cybersecurity requires its own government agency. He says we need an agency on it, we need it now. Now I'm not big on big government, but he may be right here. He's proposing a national cyber office that would not have regulatory power, but would offer advice, direct research, and convene meetings and set policy priorities. He writes, and this is where it really hits me, new technologies regularly lead to the formulation of new government agencies to control them, obviously. Trains they have their own agency, government agency. Cars have their own agency. Airplanes have their own agency. The invention of the radio led to the formation of the Federal Radio Commission, the FRC. It became the Federal Communications Commission. The value of a single agency is considerable. The alternative is to craft internet policy ad hoc and piecemeal in a way that adds complexity and doesn't counter emerging threats. So what he's saying is this: no one's regulating the internet. No one's regulating all this information that's going in there, and you have no idea of your privacy concerns because of it. And he's absolutely right. So he's a tech giant that's saying we got to slow down here because there's too much information out there, and that information is being used by everyone. How many of you have ever searched on your computer for an item to buy online, and then you went to your phone and your phone started showing you all these items coming up, just independent of it? That's what's happening. So he's saying we need some type of regulation. Let me give you this one, a leaked video. This leaked video, Google leadership dismayed reaction to Trump's election. So this came out this week. It seems that a video recorded by Google shortly after the 2016 presidential election reveals an atmosphere of panic and dismay among the tech's giant leadership, coupled with a determination to thwart both Trump agenda and the broader populist movement emerging around the globe. So Google, which controls a whole lot of information on the internet, their whole top brass was against Trump being elected, and they actually rounded up people through the internet, through different sites that they were not recognized in, and they tried to round up the Latino outreach campaign. And Google never said they were doing it, but they were doing it, and they were trying to make Hillary Clinton the president and trying to undermine Trump. So when you see a giant like that in the industry do something like that, obviously there's some problems, and we're watching it happen. Let me give you a little bit more about New World Order. France's Macron proposes EU collective defense plan. French President Emmanuel Macron suggests that Europe adopts a form of collective defense on Thursday as he strengthens calls for the EU integration in the face of concern of the United States security commitments. I won't read you the rest. Let me tell you what it's about. So Macron is saying this: Europe is united. They have the euro currency. They have no trade barriers. The borders are not there. You don't have to have visas. You can go from one border to another. And he's saying what we need now, because America is flexing its muscles, we need a standing army. We need a European army, a collective army. That hits me because I know the prophecy of the revived Roman Empire. The revived Roman Empire is going to be a European 10-nation confederacy. We see it in Daniel when he's talking about Nebuchadnezzar's dream, those 10 toes, and we see it in Revelation because it's going to go against Antichrist eventually. It's going to meet up with him first, then go against him in the Valley of Armageddon. So it's never been proposed before to have a European army other than the last army that Europe had, which was the Roman army, and it lasted until about 600 AD. So we're watching now in your lifetime someone proposing a united army in Europe. This is the revived Roman Empire. I wouldn't be surprised if they had 10 nations that joined it. And so some of these things that are hitting us are pretty amazing. Let's talk about Israel. We've just come back from Israel, and it was an amazing trip. We were very, very excited to be back, and very, very excited to go there. So Israel, lots of things were happening while we were there. I'll tell you one last one that's probably one of the most interesting and most powerful news items I could tell you this year. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But before I get there, this article says this week, Israel buys rockets that can reach anywhere in the Middle East. So there are tensions, obviously. When we were in Israel, none of us felt those tensions because we realized that we were in a safe area. 88% of the economy of Israel is based on tourism. So the money goes to help Arabs and Israelis and also Islamics. So they're not really looking to do any harm to us. But that doesn't mean that there's not tensions around them with the aggressive Arab nations that are there. So Israel knows that there's some things happening in Lebanon, which is north of Israel. And they took out, listen to what they did. They took an F-35 plane, they took it into Syrian airspace, and they took out an airplane on the tarmac of the Damascus airport. Now, that's like you going to Birmingham to fly out to Las Vegas or California and seeing a rocket come in and take out an airplane. The reason they took it out is it was loaded with explosives and incendiary devices that were going to Hezbollah. They have an amazing spy satellite network, which I'll tell you about. Defense Minister Avignon Lieberman announced Monday that Israel is purchasing advanced rockets that he says can reach anywhere in the Middle East. The Defense Ministry signed a deal with the Israeli military industries for the purchase of the rockets, estimated to cost hundreds of millions of shekels. The new rockets have innovative technology that allow them high accuracy, the Defense Ministry said. We're making the IDF stronger and more sophisticated, Lieberman said. Let me tell you about the Israeli Defense Forces. Most of, not all of their technology is American technology. And everything we have, they have. But let me just also tell you, Israel's unprecedented on its own development. They have a machine gun that shoots around corners. So we don't even have that. It shoots around corners. I'm not kidding you. You can go and look it up. And so they are developing a lot of things to obviously protect themselves. And we know that that's exactly what's happening. So let me tell you another thing that's going on there. By the way, they launched the spy satellite September 17th. Israel's to mark 30 years since its first orbital. Defense Ministry Orbital launch. Defense Ministry publishes images from its newest spy satellite showing Syrian tanks, an airfield, and Bashar al-Assad's home. So this satellite is usually any nation has to rely on America's satellites to try to do things than Israel used to. Now Israel has its own spy satellite network, and what they're doing is they publish these pictures because these are top secret pictures because they want to send a message to Syria that they know exactly what's going on and where they are. The 3 photographs released by the ministry show the Syrian presidential palace, known as the Palace of the People, tanks on a Syrian military base, and the Damascus International Airport. So when they pinpoint a jet to take it out, they're not just throwing something at it. They know exactly where they are based on the spy satellites. So they're defending themselves. How many of you know the Bible says that Israel will be there when Christ comes back? Amen. Trust me. And they are defending themselves for that. This one really shocked me, especially coming back. Somebody tell me who they are. They're Hasidic Jews. These are Orthodox Jews that follow 613 commandments of the Torah. Now, when we were in Israel, we see them many, many times. And I'm going to be very kind here. They are not pleasant people. I'm just going to be real kind. I make a point every time I see them, and I see them quite a bit in the Old City, I make a point to say Boker Tov, good morning, or Leila Tov, or Erev Tov, good afternoon or good night, when I see them. They never look at me. They never say it back. And some of them even grunt when I say it. They think that we are lost, and they actually think Jews that are not Hasidic are lost. They're very, very, I want to be very kind to them. They're very, very, the words that come are not kind. They're obstinate in their belief, I guess I'll put it that way. And they look down on everyone else. So this article really shocked me. Now, let me throw something in. In our trip, one night, late in Tiberias, I called one of my friends who is a Hasidic Jew. He's the only one. He actually lets me pray in Jesus' name with him. And he came, and several of us were there, and we talked, and he talked to us for about 25 minutes. And so he's an exception to the rule. I've known him for 25 years. But I've also been in Tiberias when I've been out there and preached on the corners, and stones were thrown at me by Hasidic Jews, and they called the police, and they took my passport away. And so there's been some times that it's been really rough with Hasidic Jews. Ultra-Orthodox Jews, this article says, are taught that Jesus Christ is not the Messiah. And yet, as Stoyan Zemov recently reported, hundreds of ultra-Orthodox Jews are turning to Jesus Christ. So what in the world could bring them about such a surprising development? Well, here's some longings that motivate some Jews to return to Jesus. First, a longing for perfection. So they are practicing 613 laws. We were talking about that before. They have to meet every single one of those. It's it's impossible for them to do this. So they're trying to get perfection and they can't do it. That's a lot of rules to follow, and it presents an incredible challenge, a challenging path to perfection. Ultra-Orthodox Jews have quite a task in front of them. If they hope to stand before God in holiness and without any sin, they have to perform these 613 laws, or they can't stand before God. Once a person who is striving for perfection comes to realize that such a feat is impossible, he's a step closer to meeting the only one who ever lived a perfect life, died a perfect death, and rose again on the third day in order to redeem imperfect people. So they're understanding that Jesus is the only one that ever lived a perfect life. They know themselves, they know they cannot live that perfect life. Second, it's a self-awareness concerning their hostility towards Christ. They have been extremely hostile. I just gave you a couple instances where I got stoned. By the way, there was another time I was driving a car through a Hasidic area of Jerusalem, and it was on the Sabbath, and they stoned my car. So I've been stoned by Islam. I've been stoned by the Jews. So they're very hostile when it comes to their laws and somebody breaking them. Well, it's until someone begins to gain a self-awareness of its ugly power over their hearts and mind, one is liable to continue perpetuating the myth that such hostility is compatible with spiritual health. What's happening is this. The ultra-Orthodox Jews are having a lot of children. They're going to outnumber most of the minority groups in Israel very, very soon. Their children are growing up realizing that the hostility is not necessary. And so these Hasidic children, which have curls and wear the black from when they're 2 years old, the males, are realizing that's not the way they want to live. And so they're embracing the love message of Jesus Christ. It's really amazing when you think about it. And lastly, there's a search for peace. Rules without relationships can produce much pride, this article says, but rarely any real peace, apart from a relationship with the Son of God through faith. Orthodox Jews, again, are hostile and aggressive. and they want change. And Jesus offers them peace. It's a total opposite of what they've been raised for. That's a really amazing article, because I've never heard anything like that. Let me give a little bit more as we continue on. Basically, that article continues on. It says this: many are realizing that the Jewish carpenter who fulfilled the Old Testament messianic prophecies is the same one who said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Let me also throw something else in. In Revelation, it talks about 144,000 virgin male Jews standing on Mount Zion that are going to proclaim really a revival. They're going to come from the Orthodox community. These are not going to come from any other place. These Orthodox are very, very serious about Zion. So maybe we're starting to see the beginnings of some of the rumblings that's going to take us to that last day. Let me give you a little bit more about Israel and what's happening there. Trump administration announces closure of the Washington PLO office. Everybody clap. Palestinian Liberation Organization. The Palestinian Liberation Organization is a organization that wanted to put Israel into the sea, driving into the sea. It's a terrorist organization. And we've had an office in the United States for them. Well, the United States announced the closure of the Palestinian mission in Washington, D.C. in what Palestinian leaders described as a declaration of war on peace efforts by the administration of the President Donald Trump. Monday, the U.S. State Department said the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, Yasser Arafat was the one that started it, has not taken steps to advance the start of direct or meaningful negotiations with Israel. We have permitted the PLO office to conduct operations that support the objective of achieving a lasting, comprehensive peace between Israelis and the Palestinians since the expiration of a previous waiver in November of 2015, the statement said. And it added, the PLO leadership has condemned the U.S. peace plan they have not yet even seen and refused to engage with the U.S. government with respect to peace efforts and otherwise. So in response, the Palestinian Authority, PA, said the move will allow Israel to continue their policies against the Palestinian people and land. He says it's a declaration of war in efforts to bring peace to our country and the region, a PA spokesman said. So let me give you my take on it. The Palestinian Liberation Organization has no desire for peace. They have a desire to continue to complain about Israel. And for America to support the PLO is the worst thing that could possibly happen on the planet. Previous presidents have done this, and they've never done away with this office. I'm going to give you my honest opinion, because you know I very rarely give you my opinion. I wish I could take Donald Trump's phone away from him. I wish I could stop him from tweeting. But he is not a bureaucrat, and he's doing some things that are very pro-Israel. We know what the Bible says. I will bless those nations that bless you. I will curse those nations that curse you. And so we're watching him do some things that's really starting to set the stage of setting up Israel as something that has an independence, which it hasn't. Even moving the capital to Jerusalem, and now he's starting to do some things against the things that made no sense, like funding Palestine when they put their money to martyrs, or closing down the PLO, or stopping some of our monies and our funds that are going to the UN, which is not a United Nations. It is something that we should chisel off Long Island and send it out into the ocean, because it's doing nothing to anybody. So he's doing some things that are very, very positive. I'm going to give you a little bit more as we go on, because we have war in the air, and I'm going to tell you about this. Russia deploys fleet off of Syria while claiming U.S. preparing for possible strike. So Russia is like a cat on a hot tin roof right now. Russia's thinking America is going to strike. They're not sure what Donald Trump is going to do. Up to 13 Russian warships have crossed the Bosphorus towards Syria so far this week, as tensions between the U.S. and Syria continue to rise. So Syria is a quagmire. We have an Alawite who is the king of Syria. That's Bashar al-Assad. He is not a Shiite, he is not a Sunni, he is not really well liked by anyone in Syria. Syria is like a jello nation. Anybody could take it over. Syrian government is worthless. Excuse me, it has no power. Russia's become its ally. Israel realizes that Iran is sending troops into Syria. Listen, you can get confused real easy in Syria. They're sending troops there. So Israel's defending itself, not allowing those troops, and they're taking them out. America is there to try to thwart ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And so you have four different armies that are kind of controlling certain things in the skies. When Israel wants to bomb a Syrian Iranian-backed spot, they have to call up Russia. When they call up Russia, they say they're going to be in the airspace, and Russia takes all of its planes out of it, because Russia, for some strange reason right now, is honoring Israel. America has to do the same thing. Then you can throw in Turkey, and you can throw in the Kurds, and you have a mess. No one can figure it out. Well, what's happening right now is Russia thinks that America is going to start hitting Syrian bases. Now, if America hits Syrian bases, then obviously the ally that Syria is to Russia will bring the ire up of Russia. So they're preparing for an American strike. Whether or not we're going to do that, I don't know, but they're preparing. Major General Igor Korshunov was quoted by agencies saying that the USS Ross, a guided missile destroyer, had entered the Mediterranean on August 25th, armed with 28 Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of hitting any target in Syria. So we have already sent a USS guided missile destroyer into the Mediterranean, and it can hit any spot in Syria. So Russia's very, very nervous. So they've sent in 13 Russian warships, have crossed the Bosphorus towards Syria so far this week, as tensions between U.S. and Syria continue to rise, according to ship spotters based on the Bosphorus Strait. The deployment of the Russian fleet comes as U.S. President Donald Trump threatens to strike the Syrian army ahead of the long-awaited Battle of Idlib. Turkey, Syria, Russia, and the United States are about to square off in the northern Syrian city with millions of civilians in the crosshairs. So it's not a pleasant spot, and it could spark almost anything. Let me give you a little bit more, since that's not so warming to everyone. Let me give you this one. This is the United States government is updating its nuclear disaster plans, and they are truly terrifying. So I'll paraphrase it. I've read through these. In 2010, we were trying to combat a 1 or 10 kiloton blast that we thought that a terrorist would come in with a dirty bomb in his backpack. A 1 to 10 kiloton blast is about the size of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 200,000 people died then. So we were trying to defend from that. Now we've changed our tactics, and we are trying to, because North Korea has tested an apparent thermonuclear bomb with a surprisingly large explosive blast size of 250 kilotons. It's what's called a city buster, much bigger than the past test blasts, and nearly the size of current U.S. intercontinental ballistic missile warheads. By the way, it could take out an entire city of New York in one blast. That's 17 million people. Now, there's been some talk today about starting back the plans for North Korea and America. There's been some talk just this very day that they're starting back. I guarantee you it's because we're moving warships. I guarantee it's because they're realizing that we're not going to play games. And now they're back at the table saying that they're going to denuclearize. And the South Korean president met with the North Korean president, which is unprecedented. And he is saying, the South Korean president, which by the way is an ally of ours, said he has a message for Donald Trump directly from Kim Jong-un. So what develops there, I don't know, but I know that there's a lot of players that are involved in it. Speaking of players, Russia is Gog of of Ezekiel 37 and 38. Gog and Magog is the ruler. So if it's talking about Russia today, Gog is Russia, Magog is Putin. If it's today. China is called the kings of the East. We know in the Valley of Armageddon that they're all going to merge. Russia and China are going to merge on the Valley of Armageddon. They have never had any type of joint war games together until this week. Russia and China begin first joint war games of their kind amid new U.S. tensions. Russia and China kicked off the first joint war games of their kind ever, a sign of their growing defense ties as their top military brass discuss strengthening relations in the wake of U.S. attempts to challenge their global rise. Russia and Chinese troops, along with personnel from 6 other nations, are training together for the first time as part of a joint anti-terrorism drill known as Peace Mission 2018, conducted under the framework of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, an 8-nation group. This is the first time ever that all countries, including both longtime rivals India and Pakistan, they hate each other, are participating together. The opening ceremony of the first exercise took place this past weekend. So we're watching. It says this. One of the Russian generals said this: "Today I offered to discuss the prospects of expanding and deepening our bilateral relations, including holding joint military exercises and exchanging opinions on the situation in the critical region of the world, including the Middle East." So we're watching prophecy kind of step up. Let me give you a little bit more as we go on for religion. That's the part of the joint exercise. You still with me tonight? All right. Anybody know who that is? We went to Rome, we went to the Vatican, and we had an audience with the Pope. Hardly. We didn't have an audience with the Pope, but he was there. We showed them where his room was, where he comes out and gives his papal decrees. But he's in trouble this week. He's in trouble his last couple of months, as a matter of fact. This article came out today. Pope Francis facing sexual abuse cover-up claims. He touts virtue of silence in Vatican Mass. Pope Francis recommends silence and prayer to react to those seeking scandal and division. Francis offered the advice Monday in his homily at Mass in the Vatican Hotel where he lives. Italian Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigiano, a former papal envoy in Washington, stunned the faithful last month by claiming Francis allegedly lifted unconfirmed Vatican sanctions against disgraced U.S. prelate Theodore McCarrick. Francis has said he won't say a word about Vigiano's allegations that Benedict XVI, as Pope, had sanctioned McCarrick, including avoiding public life, but that Francis later allegedly lifted the sanctions. Francis said Monday, Jesus' grace helps people discern when to speak and when we should stay silent. So he's not saying anything. That is not a good thing. Somebody say amen. All right, one good thing in our news, there's lots of it, but let me give you this one. Over 500,000 students to celebrate free speech by participating in Bring Your Bible to School Day on October 4th, 2018. More than 500,000 students from across the United States will join the Bring Your Bible to School movement on Thursday, October 4th. So here's what I want you to do. If you have a grandchild, or if you have a son, or if you're young enough to have sons and daughters, or grandchildren, ask them if they're bringing their Bible on October 4th. They're allowed to do it. It's free speech, obviously, and it's one day that's set aside for it. This is a day where Christian kids can shine. So if they don't have a Bible, and I would be hard-pressed to think they didn't, get them a Bible. And tell them, just take it with you to school, because it's a time where they can show their faith. Now, let me give you this last one. It's probably the most exciting thing I've ever heard concerning prophecy. While we were in Israel, this was born. Not this one, but one like this. That's the red heifer. This is a perfect red heifer. Red heifer, first red heifer in 2,000 years, born in Israel. And I'm going to tell you why it's so important, because people talk about it, but they don't tell you why. The Temple Institute announced the birth of an entirely red female calf that brings the promise of reinstating biblical purity to the world. I mean, she's a reddish brown. She has not one black hair, not one white hair. She is pure red heifer. They've been trying for decades to do this. Haven't had it in 2,000 years. The cow's birth and sacrifice is said to precede the construction of the third temple in Jerusalem. Now, we know that third temple is going to be built. We know that Antichrist, after 3.5 years in the tribulation, is going to offer a sacrifice to himself in that temple. So we know it's going to be built. And the third temple's construction, following the destruction of the previous two, heralds the arrival of the Jewish Messiah. So Jews believe if that third temple, when that third temple is built, the Messiah is going to come back. Now, while some evangelical Christian theologians have linked the building of the third temple to Judgment Day, obviously the 7-year tribulation. Rabbi Chaim Reichman, director of the Temple Institute, hailed the red heifer's birth as suggestions the time could be right for the third temple and Messiah. So our Jews are entering into what's called the Messianic age. They believe the Messiah is going to come. So what's the significance of the red heifer? Why do they need one? They cannot dedicate a temple without a red heifer, a pure red heifer. They cannot worship in it. They can't do anything in that temple unless they have a pure red heifer. So I wrote some notes down just to let you know what it means, the significance of it. So according to the Bible, the red heifer is a reddish brown cow, probably no more than 2 years old, which has never had a yoke on it. So it has to be done in the next 2 years. Listen, it was to be sacrificed as part of the purification rites of the Mosaic Law. The slaughtering of a red heifer was a ceremonial ritual in the Old Testament sacrificial system, as described in Numbers chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. The purpose of the red heifer sacrifice was to provide the water of cleansing. That's Numbers 19:9, another term for purification for sin. After the red heifer was sacrificed, her blood was sprinkled at the door of the tabernacle. This is how they did it. So that's the temple mount, and that's facing east. This right here is the Mount of Olives. In Jesus' day, and in the second temple day, there was a bridge that spanned the Kidron Valley. There's 3 valleys there. Up to where the bridge is the Kidron. You have the Tyropian or Cheesemakers Valley in the middle, and then you have the Gehenna Valley forming the letter Shin, which means blessing. So that's Zion, and that's the temple right there in the middle. I don't have my pointer for you. That's the eastern gate. So they have to have that. They have to sacrifice this heifer out here, outside the camp. They got to sacrifice the heifer, and then they take the blood and they sprinkle it over the gate that leads into Solomon's temple. That's the only way they purify it. So to have a red heifer is an exciting time. All the Hasidic Jews are probably going absolutely wild, because now they know they're closer to being able to have a temple. Let me just share the Christian and the Jesus significance of it. So the imagery of the blood of the heifer without blemish, come on, how many are thinking about it, being sacrificed and its blood cleansing from sin is obviously a foreshadowing of the blood of Christ shed on the cross for us. and for our sin. He was without blemish, just as the heifer was to be. As the heifer was sacrificed outside the camp, Numbers 13:13, it's the same way Jesus was crucified outside Jerusalem. And so Jesus also suffered outside the city gate to make people holy through his own blood. So it's a sign of Jesus' return. The Bible does teach that one day there will be a temple of God in Jerusalem. Ezekiel tells us that. Jesus prophesied that the Antichrist would desecrate that temple, Matthew 24. And for that to occur, there obviously would have to be a temple in Jerusalem once again. So many anticipate the birth of a red heifer because in order for a new temple to function, according to the Old Testament law, a red heifer would have to be sacrificed for the water of cleansing used in the temple. So when a red heifer is born, which has not been happening, by the way, they've been born, but with blemish, it has to be a sign that the temple will soon be rebuilt. Somebody asked when we came in, are we close to the time when Christ is going to come back? You're close. Trust me, a red heifer, never. How many of you understand the implication of that? This is something that's never happened, to have a pure red heifer. So obviously, keep in store for the news because we'll bring you up to date. And by the way, if we're not here, somebody else will bring you up to date. You'll get that later. That's it for in the news. I'm going to ask the ushers to come forward, and before we start our study on Psalms, they come forward for the offering. And let me give you a couple of announcements.